Hi everyone, this is Satyajit. So today we are going to discuss about how the services communicate with each other. Okay, so if you see my diagram, so there is in VPC one EC2 instance and one S3 bucket. So my requirement is the EC2 instance wants to send some file to the S3 bucket periodically. Okay, so how I can achieve that by securely and with less cost. Okay, so how we can achieve that? So if a EC2 instance is publicly accessible, so it has internet gateway attached. So S3 bucket, S3 bucket is regional services. Okay, S3 is global, but bucket is region specific. So our EC2 instance is in Mumbai region, and our bucket is in Mumbai region. So as internet is there, so we can log into that EC2 instance and we can attach proper role, and that role should have S3 access so that we can log into that EC2 instance and can send the data to the S3 bucket. It will happen easily. But the main problem is the data which travel from EC2 instance to S3 bucket, it travel publicly. So it is publicly accessible. So there might be a chance of security threat or man in the middle attack can happen. So this is not completely secure. And there will be data transfer cost will be associated. Okay. If the EC2 instance is in Mumbai region and S3 is in Mumbai region, then both are same region, so there will be no data transfer cost, but that is not uh, secure because the data travel over the internet. Okay, but the EC2 instance is in Mumbai region and S3 bucket is in different region, then if data travel over internet, there will be data transfer cost will be associated. This is all about the public EC2 instances. Let's talk about the private EC2 instances. If the instances, like let's say there is a EC2 instance and DB installed. Okay, we want the regular DB data or DB log file to store into S3 bucket. Or there will be a DB table, some critical informations we want to store in S3 bucket, which is private. Okay, so but how this can be, because there will be no internet to the NAT gateway. Sorry, there will be no internet to the private EC2 instance. Then we cannot achieve that because there will be no communications. So to achieve that, we must have to connect a NAT gateway so that we can get a internet into the private EC2 instance. And after that, we can do the regular communications because once we attach the NAT gateway, we can able to access to the internet. And once we connect it to the private EC2 instance, from there, we can do the CLI level operations and the data will travel over the internet, which is not secure. Okay, so then how to achieve that? Okay, how these things can be achieved in a proper secure manner. Okay, and the cost will be less. How this can be achieved? Okay, so let's jump into the practical to do that operations, like how to do that with internet, and after that we'll discuss about how this can be happen in the privately. Okay. So I have a two EC2 instance. If you see the jump server, this has public IP address, and in the if you go to the details in the subnet, that is in the public subnet. Okay, so this is public subnet. And if you talk about app server, this doesn't have any public address and it is in the private subnet. Okay, so now I need to create a role because it is public. Let me connect to the public IP, public EC2 instance. Okay, I have the key in the download folder. Okay, so I can able to connect to the public EC2 instance, and from there, and I have one S3 bucket. Okay, so I have a S3 bucket, and that is also in the Mumbai region. If you see the bucket, it is in Mumbai region. So I want to access the bucket from that EC2 instance, and I want to copy the data to that EC2 instance. Okay, so I need to log in and I need to do the, and if you see AWS CLI is already installed or not, AWS hyphen version. If you type it, AWS CLI is already installed. Okay, that is the prerequisite for that. Okay, and in the Amazon Linux, it is coming by default. Okay, we don't have to install, but if in case of any CentOS or Ubuntu, then we must have to install the AWS CLI. So now if I do AWS S3 LS, Okay, so it is not going to work because it is saying either we have to configure, like when to configure, like we need to put the access key and secret access key, or else we have to assign a role. So role is the benefit. I will talk about what is the benefit of role and what is the disadvantages in the while I do AWS configure in the later videos. Okay, so now I need to create a role. So I have to go to the IAM. Then I have to I need to go to the roles and create a role. It is for EC2 services. So I need to select the EC2 services. Next, I need to assign the policy. Let's say I'm giving as a S3 full permissions or S3 read permissions or I can do, but as a to do that seamlessly, I'm giving S3 full access, but it is not at all recommended. We need to give our own policy. We need to create our custom policies. So and I need to give a role ec2 hyphen s3 hyphen role, something I given the name, any random name you can give it for meaningful name. So then we need to create a role. So once the role is getting created, I need to attach that role to that ec2 instance. So you need to go to the actions, go to the security, modify IAM role, then ec2 s3 role. So once the role is attached to the ec2 instance, now I can able to do the AWS S3 LS. Okay, so if I do AWS S3 LS, I can able to list the bucket, how many buckets are there. Okay, so if I do AWS S3 LS, then I need to understand how many objects are there inside the bucket. So I will, so, so you have to do AWS S3 LS, then the bucket name. So you need to copy the bucket name and paste it here. So it will give the how many objects are there. So one object is present. So now I need to copy the regular object. So to do the, so let me create one file, something b.sh, some file I'm creating. So I'm putting some contents like hi. So now if I do the file b.sh is present, so I do AWS S3 CP and the file source file like b.sh, then the destinations bucket. Okay, so bucket name, that's it. If I do that, it's a uploaded successfully. Okay, so uploaded. So now I need to verify our S3 bucket. You can just go to the S3 services. So if I go inside the bucket cb.sh, and it will say the date as well. Okay, it is just UTC time. Just now I uploaded. So like this way, I can upload it to the S3 bucket. Okay, from the, so it is happening over the internet. Okay, so now if you see my diagram, so let's consider this DynamoDB as a S3 bucket. Okay, so my EC2 instance, okay, and EC2 instance internet gateway attached, and both are in same region, let's say in the VPC or some on the AWS services, and my EC2 instance is present here, and in this boundary S3 bucket is present. But to access this S3 bucket, my route is going via internet, and from again internet it is coming to the S3 bucket. It means as the data going over the internet, it is not secure because it is the man in the middle attack can happen. That is one demerits. And another one, there will be a latency because as the data travel over the internet, there will be latency. And second one is, third one is there will be a cost associated with that. So how these things can be achieved? Okay, and all the demerits point what we discussed, that can be improved. Okay, so to overcome that, the VPC endpoint came into picture. Okay, so VPC endpoint means it is just a private link architecture. So what it will do, the VPC endpoint, so instead of it is going to the internet, so same EC2 instance, it is going via its internal network. Okay, so privately communications will happen. So if private communications, it means there will be improved in the latency, like very low latency, and the data transfer in the private link in the private network, so it is secure. no man in the middle attack can happen. And third one is there will be no cost associated with zero cost. Okay, but the endpoint cost will be there because as we created the endpoint, some hourly cost will be there, that is minimal, but there will be no data transfer cost will be there. Okay, so that is the more benefit of the VPC endpoint. Okay, so now the same thing we can achieve via the VPC endpoint. And okay, so the another one questions like on that EC2 instance, now in that EC2 instance already a public one, right? It's a public because so how we identify public? If internet gateway is attached to its route table. So in this route table, if you see, there is an internet gateway attached. So if we create an endpoint, okay, generally endpoint is created for the private EC2 instances, so that the private EC2 instances, by the help of endpoint, it can store the data, or it can get the data like uploaded or downloaded data to S3 bucket or from S3 bucket or to any other services. So if we attach that gateway endpoint or VPC endpoint to this public subnet, then what will happen? Okay, it means already the public subnet, there is a route to that internet gateway. Okay, and another route we will add a VPC endpoint. So then what will approach, like how the communications will think, like how it will happen? It will happen publicly or privately, because if both the things are attached to the route table. So on that, the preceding order will came into picture, or the priority came into picture. Always the priority will be the private communications. If both internet and VPC endpoint will be attached, the priority first will be the VPC endpoint. Okay, so if internet gateway and VPC endpoint is attached, the communications will go, the first level of approach is always it will go to the VPC endpoint. If VPC endpoint is not working properly or there is some issues, then the communications will go via the internet. So it will be, you can consider as both are in highly available. Same way applicable in case of private network. Okay, if on the private EC2 instance you want to make communications to other services like S3, DynamoDB, Secrets Manager, or any other such services, KMS, SNS, okay, on that case VPC endpoint will be there. Okay, you can do that. But if there is an internet requirement on the private EC2 instances, if there is a requirement, then you must have to connect NAT gateway, because NAT gateway requirement is to access the internet, and VPC endpoint requirement is to how to access the resources privately. Okay, so if both the thing attached, like the NAT gateway also attached and VPC endpoint also attached, then there also the communications happen by the preceding order. Okay, so always as the NAT gateway is attached, the communications happen via internet, and as the VPC endpoint attached, the communications will happen via private communications. As both are there, then the highest priority or the highest preceding order will be same, the VPC endpoint. So VPC endpoint will come into picture. If there is an issue or something not happening on the VPC endpoint, then but highly available NAT gateway is there. Okay, so that's all about that VPC endpoint approach. Again, VPC endpoint is of two types: interface endpoint and gateway endpoint. We'll discuss more into that, but now let us do this a little bit practical about VPC endpoint, how to create endpoint. Again, we'll discuss more in detail what is the difference between interface endpoint and gateway endpoint, which services support interface and which services support gateway, and how to restrict again gateway endpoint by adding endpoint policies. Okay, so that we'll discuss in upcoming session. So now let us create an endpoint. Okay, so to create an endpoint, you need to go to the VPC, and if you see there is a endpoint, you need to click on that endpoint and create an endpoint. So in this, you can just give any endpoint, like any name, my VPC endpoint, any name you can give it. Okay, so now I'm doing it for AWS services. So now I'll search for services. So if you see here, type interface, and if you type gateway, will be there. We'll discuss in detail, but now we are more interested in the S3. But in S3, if you see, S3 both supports gateway interface, gateway endpoint, and interface endpoint. So now we are interested on the gateway. So I will just select the S3 endpoint. Okay, gateway endpoint. So now we need to select the VPC. So I need to select the VPC A, and here the route table. Okay, so now as I said earlier, like mainly the endpoint is for private subnet because the communications will happen privately, but we can attach to the public also, because in public, if there is a requirement public, in the public EC2 instance, we want to send some data to the S3 bucket, then it is generally happening on the via internet, because this internet gateway is attached. So if we want to make that also secure, then we can configure VPC endpoint. For that reason, what I'm doing, I'm adding both the route tables. So I have two route table. So one route table is the default, where I have attached internet gateway, and another route table which I created as a custom route table as a private. So I both added. Okay, and that's it. Okay, this policy we'll discuss more how to restrict in the policy, but I'm not saying, I'm not choosing anything right now, and so I'm creating an endpoint. So this endpoint creations, it will take some time to make the system. Okay, it is available now. So as the route table both are attached now. Okay, so now I need to verify on that route table whether that VPC endpoint is properly added or not. Okay, so to do that, I need to go to the route table. So I have both route table now VPCs. If you see here, both are VPC, the first and second, and this is the private. I need to go to the routes. Okay, if you see the VPC endpoint is attached or added. Okay, and if you see the public also, and that is also route also VPC endpoints attached. Okay, so now how to test it? Because if I do the AWS S3 LS here, AWS S3 LS, it is going to work. But how you will make sure, okay, this is happening through public or this is happening through private? Okay, so let us, because if you see the private route table, okay, in the private route table, there is no internet, like there is no NAT gateway, only VPC endpoint is there. So what I'm, so if I connect to that EC2 instance, and I can verify if AWS S3 LS is working, listing bucket or copying, then I'm very sure, okay, it is happening through an endpoint, because there is no internet, there is no NAT gateway. So what I need to do, I need to connect to this app server. Okay, so I'll copy this app server IP, and I will on this because this is a jump server, public server. So here I will go AWS S3, sorry, AWS SSH. I need to do the SSH. I will specify the key and EC2 user and the private IP of the server. So now I am able to connect to the private. Just for verification, just to ping google.com. It should not work because there is no NAT gateway. Okay, there is no internet. So now I will do the AWS S3 LS. Okay, it will not work because there is no role attached. Okay, because AWS S3 LS, there is no role attached. I need to attach the role as well. So now what I need to do, I need to go to the actions, network, sorry, security, modify IAM roles, and attach the EC2 S3 role and update the IAM role. So now I have attached the role. So my EC2 instance can able to communicate with the S3 bucket. But let us verify. If I do AWS S3 LS, so I can able to list the bucket. So this again, once again, I'm verifying ping google.com. So ping is not working, but still I can able to list the bucket. Let us create one empty file, touch c.sh. Now I want to copy this file or copy this object to the S3 bucket. So I'll do AWS S3 cp c.sh, and then copy the bucket name. Okay. Okay, so once I do that, if you see the uploaded, it's successful. Okay, I can verify AWS S3 LS by a command line. Also I can see the new object c.sh, which is 0, like it's an empty file, it is added. And same thing I can view on the CLI as well, sorry, from the GUI also. You see the c.sh file is added. Okay, so now I am very sure the VPC endpoint is working fine, and VPC endpoint is the gateway endpoint, like S3 endpoint, is working fine. Okay, so in the next videos we can discuss more into that again in great detail. What is endpoint? Okay, in detail, what is VPC endpoint, and what is gateway endpoint, and what is interface endpoint? What are the advantages of gateway endpoint, or what are the advantages of interface endpoint? Like the the main difference between gateway endpoint and interface endpoint, and we can do practical both one interface endpoint and gateway endpoint. Okay, so please go through this and practice it. And if you have any questions, just put into the comments, and I will read those comments and I will help you out. Thank you for watching my videos.